Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Amanda Brown. I'm the clerk to Avon Fire Authority. Welcome to our annual general meeting. Today is Wednesday, the 22nd of June, 2022, and we are being hosted at Weston Fire Station. I'm opening this meeting today because the first item on the agenda is the election of the chair for the municipal year. Now, we have had apologies from your current chair, who has agreed to continue in post as chair, Councillor Brenda Massey, but she is unfortunately away due to having tested positive for COVID today. But we do need to formally elect a chair for this municipal year. So can I have a proposer, please? Don, thank you. And Ruth to second. Any abstentions? Any votes against? All in favour, show your hands. Thank you very much. So we've now elected Brenda as our chair. We then need to move on to the second item, which is the election of the vice chair for the municipal year. Councillor Donald Davis has agreed to stand again as vice chair. So can I have a proposer, please? Oh, everybody's hand's gone up. So Councillor Monk and seconder. Okay. Wilcox, Councillor Wilcox, sorry, I should have said. Super, thank you very much. Any abstentions? Any votes against? Everyone in favour? Thank you very much. So I'm now going to hand over the script to your Vice Chair. Thank you, Don.
Yes, so thank you everybody, and I wasn't expecting to be sat here, and you probably weren't expecting me to be sat here, but having had communication with Brenda, I'd like to unanimously, hopefully, send our best wishes to her. She isn't very well at the moment at all, and we wish her a speedy recovery, and I hope you'll all join me in that. But very unfortunate timing for lots of reasons, so I'll do my best to cope here. So thank you for coming down to Weston for our AGM, and thank you to the station for hosting us. I will use the formal agenda now. Apologies for absence. We have received apologies for absence from...
Right, we have a number of names. So Councillors Ash, Councillor Bromley, Councillor Ernie Brown, Councillor Eddy, Councillor May, Councillor Massey, and the two councillors who have not arrived today, in addition to those, are Councillors Ali and Councillors Goggin. But I confirm that we do have 11 councillors in the room, so we are quorum. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so the item number 4 on the agenda then is the emergency evacuation procedures, and I'll hand over to the Chief Fire Officer to guide us.
Thank you, Chair. Members, we're not expecting any fire alarm drill today, so if anything does occur, then that will be a real incident. So I can ask members to exit the engine house where the doors are open and make their way to the rear of the car park, where we'll do a roll call, and then crews will deal with whatever incident that we're faced with at the time. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item 5, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest that you need to declare? I'm seeing nobody moving, so I assume there are none. We've not been pre-advised, have we?
No, we haven't.
Item number 6 on the agenda is public access.
I can confirm none received.
None received, thank you. So item 7 is Chair's business. So pretend I'm Brenda. So welcome all to the AGM. And we have to welcome a couple of new members, who are Councillor Steve Smith, welcome, and Councillor Andrew Varney, welcome. And I think we also would like to record our thanks to Councillors Andrew Brown and Chris Windows for their work on the authority as they have now left. I think Chris Windows, because we went over the time period, and I think Andrew Brown has gone on to even bigger things elsewhere, I understand, if that's possible. And we wish them all good luck for the future. So we have sent some thank you letters for them. I have to confirm this fire authority meeting is taking place as a face-to-face meeting, and due to the continuing prevalence of COVID-19, we are continuing to be sensible and, where possible, limiting the number of attendees at meetings, and we are recording this meeting for public viewing. And can I then thank directly Station Manager Paul Incledon, if he's around. If he's not, he might be busy somewhere. And all the crews here, thank you very much for the help in arranging the demonstrations and for looking after us today, so thank you. I've got to remind you that the Home Office issued a white paper consultation on the 18th of May called Reforming Our Fire and Rescue Service, Building Professionalism, Boosting Performance and Strengthening Governance. And the clerk has asked members to write their views and feedback, particularly on the governance section of the white paper. And that needs to go to Emma by close of business on the 31st, sorry, on the 11th of July.
So, members, for your email inbox, you'll see that Emma sent a message from me about this on the 31st of May at 15:45. Dawn and Brenda have requested a separate meeting to discuss this as well, so you will be invited to that. We're looking at the week commencing the 4th of July. But if you can't make that meeting, if you could give me your views on that consultation by email, that would be helpful. And the deadline for that is the 11th of July. Thank you.
And also the Fire Commission, the LGA Fire Commission considered this a couple of weeks ago, and both Brenda and I were at that meeting, and I believe there's a recording of that available if you want to see what other views are elsewhere in the country. I think the first bit of the transmission is around that part. Fire station champions. Each year members are invited to become fire station champion. I know several of you already are. And you're invited to visit your allocated station and meet the station manager and the crews. And you'll also be sent a monthly performance update for the station. We have several fire stations available. And I think if you could volunteer to take over one, then Emma has got the list. Is that correct, Emma? Yes, I think you've got them on your desk. Oh, have I? All right. I have them on my desk.
So any volunteers, just contact Emma. You'll see the gaps on the list if there are any vacancies.
Yes.
Thank you.
I have found it. Yes, the current vacancies are Blagdon, Clevedon, Kingswood, Nailsea, Nova Way, Portishead, Radstock, Temple, Thornbury, Winscombe, Yatton, fire stations. Okay. Thank you. And like notices in church, isn't it? A reminder to please make sure you've completed and returned your member interests form, sent it back to Emma. They were all emailed out. If you can make sure those are completed and sent back to Emma. Those are, I think, a legal requirement, and a certain MP, I think, has got into trouble recently for not filling in his forms, and these are kind of our equivalent of those. So I'm not saying the scrutiny would be quite the same, but there is an obligation to complete them.
I think we've got them all ready for the new members. I think I've got 8 so far out of 20 elected members.
So that means we haven't got 12. No. So it does mean you're on, as some of us are getting exposure in certain other political groups and pressure groups from Somerset, people are looking at these things. So don't just think it's a bit of paper that gets filed away. Nobody looks at it, because they are. Right, sorry. I've now got to ask you to introduce yourselves. So I'm Don Davis, I'm the Vice Chair, and we'll go around that way. Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Varney. I'm the Local Councillor, Bristol City Council for Brislington West. Thank you very much.
Afternoon, I'm Steve Smith, Councillor for Westbury-on-Trim and Henleys in Bristol.
Councillor David Wilcox for Lockleys in Bristol.
Councillor Ben Nutland, Councillor for Yate North in South Gloucestershire.
Councillor Richard Tucker, North Somerset Council, Weston-super-Mare, Milton Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Adam Monk, I'm a councillor representing Filton in South Gloss.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Neil Butters, Bath Avon South Ward, Bath North East Somerset.
Good afternoon, I'm Robert Payne, Councillor for Weston-super-Mare Central, North Somerset Council.
Good afternoon, my name is Councillor Yasin Mahmood, Lawrence Hill from Bristol City Council.
Councillor Ruth Jacobs, North Somerset, Wixon Lawrence and St George's.
Good afternoon, Brian Hopkinson, Councillor for Charlton Hayes and Cribbs for South Gloucestershire.
Thank you all, and we have several officers, and I will ask the Chief Fire Officer to go first, then we'll go around all the officers. We'll go anti-clockwise.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members, colleagues, members of the public. Simon Shilton, your Chief Officer and Chief Executive.
Good afternoon, Angie Feeney, Director of Corporate Services here at Avon Fire Rescue Service. Good afternoon, Steve Imbrie, one of the Assistant Chiefs for the service.
Good afternoon, Claire Bentley. I'm the Head of Finance for Avon Fire.
Good afternoon, Tanya Nathan and I'm Head of Procurement. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Vaughan Jenkins, I'm currently Temporary Assistant Chief Fire Officer, Service Delivery Support.
Good afternoon, I'm Danielle Neal. I'm Treasurer to the Fire Authority.
And I'll introduce myself again, Amanda Brown, the Clerk to Avon Fire Authority.
Thank you. We all did very well there, didn't we? Right, so we've got the microphones to make sure that the recording go better and people can hear at the back. So thank you very much. Welcome to members of the public and members of the press who have attended. Good to see you all. Thank you for coming. And if you please turn your microphone off when you finish speaking, that will also help others to be heard. We'll use the usual voting process as we're in open session. I'll ask for any votes for, votes against, and any abstentions, and we'll record for that. So I think that's all the notices. I haven't missed anything out, have I? Right, so item number 8, part 1, which is the minutes of the ordinary Avon Fire Authority meeting held on the 30th of March. I'm going to propose that they are signed as a true record. Does anybody want to second for me? Councillor Ben Rutland, thank you. Do we have all those in favour, please? Thank you. Anybody against? Anybody abstaining? No, thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. I can then sign those. And then item 9.1, which is the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee. And I ask Councillor Robert Payne to take that item for me, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to propose that we accept the minutes.
Okay, does we have a seconder for that? Thank you, Ruth Jacobs. And all those in favour of accepting them? I think that was unanimous. Nobody wanted to vote against or abstain? No? Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. So the first item on the substantive business is item number 10, item for decision, appointments for the municipal year, and I'll hand over to the clerk.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So, members, this is my paper. It's a standard paper that you receive at every annual general meeting. It asks you to confirm the members which are sitting on the Fire Authority. So the paper, in the recommendations, it asks you to allocate members to the Fire Authority committees, which I will come to shortly. The committees themselves appoint their chairs, so you don't do that. That's done at the first meeting of the municipal year. You're also asked to appoint your representative on the Local Government Association, appoint your representative on South West Councils and on South West Councils Employers Panel, and also appoint your employer representatives for the Local Pension Board. The paper's very brief, but if I take you to page 30 of your bundle, that's a list of all 20 elected members, which includes our 2 new members as well, Councillor Steve Smith and Councillor Andrew Varney, so welcome to you both. On page 31 of the bundle, you will see there's a table I've inserted in my paper. Now, we were very lucky this year because we'd agreed with the political group leaders who would have elected members on which committees, and our new members have very kindly agreed to slot into the posts that their previous incumbents held, which saved us a lot of headaches trying to rebalance the committees politically. So thank you to you both for that. I appreciate it. So the table shows the proposed chairs for each. So you've got Paul Goggin for chair of AJAC, David Wilcox for chair of People and Culture, and Robert Payne for chair as PRSC. I hope they're all still content to be chairs. And then we have our 2 new members sitting on the Local Pension Board. The Local Pension Board, I should explain, has 2 elected members and 2 employee reps. And then what we do is we have 2 substitutes in case you 2 are not available. So we have Councillor Richard Eddy, who's not here today, and Councillor Yasin Mohammed, who is here, who's also a substitute in the event that we need them, which is helpful. Thank you. So I'm asking you to confirm those committee appointments as per paragraph 3.2. And then if I refer you to 3.4, by convention, you normally nominate your Fire Authority Chair to be our representative at the Local Government Association, and Brenda has confirmed she's willing to continue in that role, which is good. Over the page, on page 32, we are invited to send a representative to South West Council's meetings, which meet twice a year. Our Vice Chair, Don, has very kindly offered to continue as that representative, and he's also offered to be the South West Council's Employers Panel representative. So that's paragraphs 3.5 and 3.6, which has been agreed by the previous incumbent, Councillor Bromley, who was happy to hand over that to Councillor Don Davies. And then finally, 3.7, your two new members will be those who will sit on the local pension board, and we have training organised already for that. So I think it's a very simple set of recommendations. So if we go back to them on page 29, paragraph 2A is to allocate members to the Fire Authority committees. I would just add to that wording, Emma, as per the table on paragraph 3.2, if you all agree, and then appoint your representative on Local Government Association as Councillor Brenda Massey, appoint your representative on South West Councils as Councillor Don Davies, appoint your representative on South West Councils Employers Panel also as Councillor Don Davies, and appoint your employer representatives to the Local Pension Board as Councillors Steve Smith and Andrew Varney. So I suggest we take a vote on all of those recommendations as one, if you're content.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, I need a proposer for those decisions. I've got Ben Nuttman proposer. I see a seconder. Neil Butters seconding, please. So, is there any debate? I'm seeing no questions or comments, so let's go straight for a vote. All those in favour? I don't see anybody voting against. If you're voting against or abstaining, could you just show now? No, that's unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. And thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
All right.
This is a working fire station. We'll just wait for that to pass. I think it's a call, isn't it, at this stage?
Okay. It's probably announcing our ice creams are being delivered, is that right? Right, so item 11 then is the members' information, which we're asked to note the report and authorised publication, statistics and appendices on 1 and 2 of the Fire Authority website. As your papers 11, starting on page 35 in the pack. Is there anything you wanted to say, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. No, this information is very self-explanatory. It's just a listed Appendix 1 of all the meetings that elected members have attended. So there is a colour code on the table. So yellow is attended, red is, green is attended, orange is a substitute, red is apologies, and black was no apologies. So absolutely no issues with that table at all. The table of expenses paid at Appendix 2 does include some old names that you will think, gosh, I haven't seen their name for a while. And the reason for that is that they received amounts in the previous financial year or towards the tail end of that financial year. So they appeared in column 1, but not in the other columns. So don't be alarmed, we're not still paying allowances to old members. So I'm happy for you to take a vote on the recommendations.
For noting. Do I see a proposer for noting?
And for authorising publication.
Oh, and both Councillor Neil Butters as proposer. Do I see a seconder? Ruth Jacobs, thank you. Is there any debate? See no request for debate. So are we all in favour to accept, note and permit the publication? Thank you. I think that looks like unanimous. I don't see anybody not voting or voting abstentions. Okay, thank you, colleagues. Item number... I've got to change now, haven't I? Item number 18. I believe that there's a timing issue for our Director of Corporate Services, so we're taking item 18 early.
Do members need a moment to find paper 18? It's at page 143 of your bundle, if that helps. And for the benefit of those watching, it's the immediate detriment update paper. 143.
Okay, there are a number of recommendations on the paper on page 143, but I think for our own benefit, it's probably better to let Angie Feeney give a presentation first before we decide. We've got to make a choice in these recommendations. Thank you. Over to you, Angie.
Thank you, Chair, also for being able to bring this paper up to earlier in the agenda. Members, this is a paper coming to you for a decision. I'll run through those recommendations as suggested after my presentation because I think that would probably make most sense. I am aware that this is an issue of some history and complexity, and therefore hopefully for new members, whilst I don't intend to go through the summary of the history, that has been helpful to you in the paper as well as the back references to those. As you know, I also offer to have a pre-discussion should you have any questions on that as well. So hopefully the history, you have an indication of what the issue is and what the history is. You'll recall, members, that as the scheme managers, you've agreed that the current position on immediate detriment in this authority is that you are processing immediate detriment for those coming up to retirement under immediate detriment arrangements and in respect of moving their lump sum and annual pension back to the legacy scheme levels. And you continue to defer the adoption of what's called the LGA MOU and framework, which extends the matters that are resolved for forthcoming retirees, as well as seeking to resolve the pension issues for those who are already retired. So therefore you're processing those coming up to retirement, you're not yet processing those who have already retired. You are due to look again at the framework adoption in autumn 22, by which point we hope to have been able to calculate more around the financial implications, and also that the tax liabilities which were highlighted at the last meeting, would be resolved through secondary legislation, which is expected in autumn. However, I'm bringing this matter back to you early for reconsideration at this time because there has been some key developments since the Fire Authority meeting in March. Before I go through those key developments, I just wanted to acknowledge that this paper has been jointly prepared by myself and both of our statutory officers because the key developments are particularly financial and legal in nature, and therefore members may wish to have particular advice on the legal and financial prudency of both stopping and continuing with immediate detriment. So what has happened since I last came to you in March? Firstly, the Treasury have responded to the Scheme Advisory Board to clarify what the tax implications are of moving ahead of the legislation, and therefore in turn, what's due to the Home Office current position of what the liabilities, the potential financial liabilities would be for members because the Home Office are no longer funding the consequences of processing immediate detriment. The detail of those implications are set out in section 5.2 of your report and appendix 2, and you'll see that they're highly complex and technical in nature. And while some aspects of those appear less relevant, because primarily they would refer to people who have already retired, which we are not processing, there are some that are particularly relevant to our current processing of forthcoming retirees. So in particular, the additional administrative costs, and also the issue of tax relief. And on tax relief, the HMT have established that they may deem members no longer to be entitled to tax relief that they have received on or will be receiving on their 2015 contributions, in which case that tax relief would be removed and the individuals would need to pay it. But then in turn, you as the employers would then need to compensate for it, or at least compensate for the difference between the tax relief they'd received now compared to remedy in 2023. So that is a potential unfunded cost. There's also the potential implications that if HMT also consider the lump sum being paid tax-free to have been under the reform scheme, so therefore the 2015 scheme, it could then become taxable And again, there would be tax liability on the individual, which in turn would then be tax liability for the compensation of that on the employer. So this is what we currently understand about the potential implications of that tax note with reference to our current processes. Both the LGA and the Treasury note and caveat that as yet there are potential unidentified further tax issues which may emerge as they continue to work through the amendments to the secondary legislation, and those would also need to be compensated for and paid from local budgets. On the legal side, what's changed since we last talked about this in March is that the National Fire Chiefs Council have indicated that the National Police Chiefs Council have received legal advice following that HMT note. The written advice has not been shared with us, we have asked, but the verbal update is that scheme managers should not implement immediate detriment at this time, as there is no legal mechanism to pay that without undue risk. And that links to the HMT position that, in their view, the Equality Act provision does not stretch as far as resolving the tax issues which need to be resolved by secondary legislation. As a consequence of those financial and legal developments, three main things happened. First of all, the NFCC issued a letter to Chief Fire Officers reiterating the HMT note and warning of significant financial consequences if fire authorities and members continue to go ahead, and those implications being on local budgets. However, they equally recognised that it was a scheme manager decision. Secondly, a number of services have temporarily suspended immediate detriment until the legal position and financial liability and local budgets become clearer. However, in addition, as you will see from your paper, some services are continuing to process Category 1 cases, which we call the forthcoming retirees. The FBU in the employee relations picture has also escalated, with the active notes there of the intention now to raise claims far and wide if immediate detriment is not implemented, rather than their members needing to wait to the October 23 legislation for this pension matter to be resolved. All parties, including HMT and the NFCC, recognise that this is a very difficult position for scheme managers and employers, because in effect, due to the government issue, which is taking some time for them to resolve, scheme managers are therefore left carrying the legal and financial liability of both proceeding with immediate detriment, but also of not proceeding with immediate detriment, and therefore this is a fine judgment call. On the matter of financial liability and trying to establish the quantum of that, since the paper was issued, so on the 20th of June, the LGA have issued what I've previously referred to being a ready reckoner, which are spreadsheets which they think that the fire and rescue authorities can use to estimate the cost liability of on local budgets of adopting the LGA and the FBU framework. Having looked briefly at those ones, they only came in on the 20th, it will be a considerable piece of work for us to run this, and the assumptions that this is based on are also heavily caveated. Also, that this is based on adopting the LGA and the FBU framework, which isn't the current position. So in order to come back to you with what the liability also means for you continuing as is, I will need to try and extract from that spreadsheet just the aspects which apply to your current processing. So therefore, that is going to take some time to work through. And also, of course, our head of finance and treasurer will want to have more information to confirm the veracity of those spreadsheets and the assumptions underneath them. But we have been provided with a potential tool now from the LGA which could assist with that. I'll now go through the options, and then I just want to talk a little bit about numbers, and then I'll throw it open to questions. So in terms of the options and decisions, the first thing the Fire Authority is asked to do is note the developments since the Fire Authority meeting on the 30th of March 22. I've indicated what those are, but they are summarised in the rest of number A. B, decide whether to pause the processing of immediate detriment cases until the authority are better able to calculate the financial liability on local budgets, informed by the anticipated, now received, ready reckoner and guidance. It is proposed that this pause would be with immediate effect, but that firefighters in the pipeline to retire under ID, immediate detriment in early July, are able to continue to do so. Or the option is to decide whether to instead continue with the existing arrangements of processing Category 1 cases and review the immediate detriment issue again in October 22, when the tax legislation should have been enacted and the tax position relating to both employer and employee liabilities should be clearer. So again, just to give you the numbers, which I think would be helpful. So the impact on scheme members and the scale of financial risk for the period between July and the end of October, again, which is when we expect the tax legislation to be in and where one of the proposals is to defer a decision. If you continue with the existing arrangement, on a worst case scenario, there would be 33 people who are forthcoming retirees who may want to retire under immediate detriment between now, well, beginning of July and the end of October. However, that's a worst case scenario and one that I don't think is likely to happen. And that's because the 33 number relates to people who are going at 25 years pensionable service, and that is not the trend or the pattern that we have seen to date. 33 is also the number who might be able to go. As you'll recall, they then need to be run through a matrix to actually confirm that they are eligible to retire under immediate detriment, because we are still operating some of the exemptions which you may remember from a previous meeting. So therefore, if I look at what I believe to be the more likely scenario, which is the age 50 and 30 years pensionable service, there are potentially 10 people who could request to retire under immediate detriment in the period between July and the end of October. And 4 of those have given their intention to do so at this point, and 2 of those with an intention to do so in July. As 12 weeks' notice is required of going on immediate detriment, the majority of those 10 people should have been giving their indications at this point. And of course, the people who are intending to go in July are quite some way through the existing process at the moment. And to give you the context of actually how many we've produced so far, 18 people have been able to retire on immediate detriment terms so far since we began this process, and 13 since the Home Office guidance was withdrawn. And so you'll recall that's the point where the financial liability started to move towards local budgets. And finally, much of this matter is about timing, with impacted scheme members, retired and not retired, will have their pensions resolved and backdated when the government legislation is in place, which is either on or by October 23. And in the interim, they are in receipt of pensions. So this is about whether, to enable earlier payments, the Fire Authority risk funding those tax liabilities from local budgets. However, as a final point, October 23 remains a long time away, and this remains a very important matter to our staff and our employee relations. And also, legal costs are equally a burden on local budgets and staff resources. So that's my kind of presentation to run you through the paper and also to give some context and to help you with the decisions. I appreciate, as I say, that this is a fine judgment call, and therefore you might have some questions for both myself, the Chief, or the statutory officers.
Angie, can I just add something for the benefit of the members who've joined us today? It might just be worth explaining that when the original Fire Authority decision was taken in June last year, I had commissioned a very detailed advice from Queen's Counsel, a QC, about this issue. It was a very complex piece of work. I think the advice ran to about 33 pages, which gives you some idea of the complexity. And the decision that was taken back in June basically mirrored his cautious approach. So the advice was, ideally don't do any processing, but if you want to for the sake of employee relations in particular, then these are the categories that he felt were more straightforward. And there were a whole list of things in that decision back in June last year where they were less straightforward cases that might have tax implications. So it was back to the tax issue again. And so those less straightforward cases, he said, don't process. So this is why we have a sort of checklist, if you like, when someone asks to go on immediate detriment. That's where that came from. I thought it would be useful to give you that context. The other issue is that I haven't been able to go back to council for more advice. Sadly, he passed away, which is the main reason why. But secondly, the legal landscape changed significantly since his advice, because his advice was almost purely based on the Home Office guidance, which was encouraging fire authorities to pay out immediate detriment claims. And what council said was, well, we need to just be a bit careful about this for the following reasons, and he identified all the risks. So that landscape has changed, and I set out at paragraph 7.3 all the changes which have happened since his advice, to give you some clarity. I won't go through them because most of them have been mentioned by Angie in her introduction. You might be wondering why I haven't sought further legal advice separate to the QC. We were hoping right up to the 11th hour that the National Police Chiefs Council would share their advice with us. So when we got the circular from them, it said there will be written advice to follow, and we've been asking for it and it hasn't followed. I'm not convinced it would add a lot of clarity to this issue, because I think any advice would be heavily caveated with well, this is what the government's saying. So I'm not sure further legal advice would help you at this stage, but that's an explanation. Is there anything, Danielle, you wanted to add from a financial point of view?
Thank you, Amanda. I think Angie's done a really, really good summary job of pulling together all of the pertinent issues, and the financial issues were clearly documented in this paper. So I don't think I have anything to add at this point. I think it would be important, whatever the decision the Fire Authority makes, that we do have a robust methodology to start costing. And I'm not quite sure at the moment we're at that point, but I'm certainly happy to take any financial questions if members do have any.
Thank you all. Just a couple of things for clarification, Angie, before I ask members for questions. Am I right in thinking there is a financial risk to both us as the employer, but also to individual firefighters retired, because their tax position could be different to what they expected to be, and they would be liable for tax payments? Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's what the HMT is saying, is that there would be liabilities for employers, but also for anyone who's processed under immediate detriment. But I think it's more kind of weighted towards employers, because I think the inference would be that the scheme members would be compensated for that, because it's nothing of their own doing. And therefore it would be the employers who'd made the decision to go ahead before the legislation was in place who would then be compensating them.
But there may be more other implications for their tax position anyway, which we can't foresee.
Yes, because we can only deal with their pensions part. Of course, we don't know the implications on their wider tax affairs. Okay, so there's a risk to them. And the other clarification is we're expecting the secondary legislation in autumn of this year, yes? With reference to tax, yes.
Yeah. And what was the other what was in autumn 2023? Because I got confused there.
By October 23 is when we expect all of the legislation to be in place to fully resolve remedy across the board. But the secondary tax legislation will be in by October of this year. Is that what you're saying? It will be in. Well, they said autumn. Right. So that's why I've kind of gone for October. Okay. But yeah, that's the best information that we've got through from government and LGA. Okay, so colleagues, this isn't desperately straightforward, as I'm sure if you read the papers and have read the previous papers will understand. If anybody can do a 2-minute précis of it for us, I'm sure we'll be most grateful. Do I see any questions before?
Councillor Hopkinson had his hand
Oh, sorry, Councillor Hopkinson.
I must admit, I've not actually seen anything about the Financial Services Authority, because generally speaking, when pensions are arranged, a lot of things actually go back through them. You know, you've got to abide by rules, and obviously the pension schemes have got to be agreed. And then if you're running it, it's slightly different than some contracts. But the reality is, I mean, when things are altered, these things should be sorted out. So that, you know, you don't enter into something which is, you know, like a mystery. And it does appear to be that, you know, I mean, have we actually been in contact with the Financial Services Authority or not? You know, because at the end of the day, it does seem to be the government and, you know, the tax offices are basically not really playing the game, as far as I'm concerned, you know. And it ends up being, you know, the fire authority have got to be the ones that carry the can. It just seems, it seems strange, because as an employer, that's what you are. But if things change within pensions, and there's legislation, you know, you've got one style of pension and you change to a different one, which is basically government orientated, then it should be their liability, personally, you know, the government liability, not actually the fire authority. So that's the way I think about it. I'm just wondering if there's been any kind of conversation.
I am aware that there is a lot of lobbying of government and conversations with government, in particular from the LGA and the FBU, encouraging them to bring forward their timetable to resolve this matter before October 23. So I'm aware that that lobbying has taken place. Obviously, what we're seeing here is that that lobbying has not yet resulted in a movement in those kind of dates, which is part of the reasons why I keep kind of bringing it back to you as the scheme manager.
Yeah, I can see the point of the lobbying. Sorry, I can see the point of the lobbying, but Financial Services Authority, basically, people put complaints into them and then they come back to you, and I'm just wondering if they've ever been consulted, because, you know, you've got the tax office, you've got the government, and we're waiting on backwards and forwards to them. But I understood that they were the ones that basically just checked to make sure that all the balances were in place, and if it, you know, or said who's at fault or whatever, you know. Just seems to be that way, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I guess the way the pensions are formulated, it doesn't relate to the FSA, because they aren't investments as such, are they? It's a unfunded scheme, isn't it? So there's no liability in terms of advice or anything like that. Steve Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Angie, I just wanted to clarify the numbers in terms of the numbers of people. So the reports, I think there's 4 people expected to retire, I think, between now and October. I think it was 2 July, 1 August, 1 September. Yeah. And the proposal option B says that those retiring in July would still go through. Is that those 2 people? So are we talking a difference of 2 people if we pause now?
Yeah, so...
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so we know that 4 people are intending to retire between July and October, and 2 of those are in July. And I point out the July because they're very far through the process and just about to retire. However, there's potentially another 6 people who could be intending to go and would hit the 50 and the 30 in that time period. They just haven't yet declared their intentions. So that's the sort of, 10 possible, 4 people that we already know their intentions, 2 as early as July. Does that help with the clarifying?
Well, so the question I'm asking is option B here. It says it's proposed that this pause will be of immediate effect, but firefighters in the pipeline to retire in July are able to continue. So does that mean of those 4 that we know about, 2 would go through anyway because they're in July?
If you agree
if we accepted that.
Yeah, as an alternative, there is of course the option to extend that further, and that if you were deciding to do the temporary pause, what you could say, for example, is that you would say accept the people who are already in the pipeline and given their intentions. So that would include all 4 potentially. Yeah. So that's an alternative. Again, remembering that they're supposed to give 12 weeks notice. So other than the people who are going far into October, we should have been having some of these indications from at this point. So that's an alternative potential addition to recommendation B, which I think would take in your point. But of course, that would need to be proposed as a potential kind of.
Fine.
Okay, the chief. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, could I just have one more follow-up? Just trying to get an understanding of the scale of the impact on an individual. So if you're one of those 4 people, what difference does it make to you if you retire under ID now or not, presumably meaning you get the benefit from the 2015 scheme, in terms of the amount of lump sum, the amount of pension?
Yeah, okay, so this was covered in the previous paper.
Apologies, I thought I'd read them all, but maybe
luckily
I missed one.
I've come prepared. And what was covered in that previous paper was that an impacted firefighter retiring at age 50 and after 30 years without ID applied would have the following. So they had their 92 annual pension of 17,991, I won't bother with the pence part of it, and a gross retirement sum of 143,932. With the 2015 scheme, with a deferred annual pension of 1,553 and a gross retirement lump sum of 6,215. So they'd receive a part of that now and then a part of that later. If immediate detriment is applied, then that would be fully under the 92 scheme. These figures increase as follows. So the annual pension after the commutation would be 19,748 plus a gross retirement lump sum of 157,987. So around, when I looked at those, around a £14,000 difference. But of course, this is also on a example firefighter and also an example firefighter as opposed to your crew.
So
watch,
every individual case will be.
So every individual, but I hope that gives you a little bit of a ballpark.
Thank you very much.
And these amounts would only be for 2 years maximum then, wouldn't they? Or 18 months maximum?
Yeah, I think what Don's point is that the legislation will fix it when all the secondary pension so you have your Act, which I think has now passed, but the secondary pension regulations for the administrators to follow, once they're in place by October 23, everybody's going to get what they're entitled to. They're just going to get it that little bit later. So nobody loses it. It's just whether they get it early or not.
Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So members, for me this is obviously a very complex, as we're learning more and more with Andrew's briefing, but also a very sensitive and emotive topic, both from an employee perspective and also our industrial relations as well. And we're left in a very difficult position around which choice to make with regards to processing immediate detriment. That choice being with trying to our will and desire to try and comply with the determination from the tribunal, but also around the lack of, if you like, legislative guidance or legislative cover that we require in order to be assured with good financial decisions. Now, all things being equal, my preference would be to maintain the path that we're taking at the moment. However, we can't do that without, of course, paying cognizance to the increasing financial risk to the authority with the lack of clarity that we're faced with. But I do believe that there could possibly be some level of compromise that we could offer here, or for discussion or consideration, which is not dissimilar to your view, Councillor Smith. And that would be that we do know that there are 4 declared. And those members of staff would be declaring on the basis of understanding that we're processing immediate detriment. And as such, they'll be making their decisions based on that financial statement that they would receive for their pensions. So it would only be right, in my view, for us to continue along those lines in processing those 4 individuals. But however, also from that perspective is we put a temporary pause on processing any more at this moment in time, to allow us sufficient time, to review the ready reckoner that Angie has referenced there, that we only received on Monday, and we're yet to go through that calculation and whether or not that helps and supports and provides a little bit more clarity in relation to the financial risk to the authority. But also would allow us during that period of time, because we haven't got any more until at least post-September, that, of course, any tax changes or clarity around the tax that we're expecting in autumn may well also help a little bit more in providing members with some further information for our next steps. So I think it will be prudent of us to continue review as new information comes to light. But I do think there's some further consideration around the 4 that we're aware of at this moment. Because as I say, they would have been basing their decision on the basis that currently we've been processing immediate detriment. Thank you, Chair.
I've got Adam Monk next.
I've probably got confused. But there was referred to legislation which is due in October 23, which will provide the ultimate clarity, which I understand all of that. But how certain are we that it will be October 20? And I'm not trying to catch anyone out. There's not a political comment hidden in there or anything. Just trying to understand that. Because taking on board what Simon says, I think it is reasonable to process these 4 individuals on the ready reckoner, because on their immediate detriment, because that's what they've based their decisions on. And then we should maybe communicate something clearly to staff so to try and resolve this issue. But I was going to ask, is there somebody we should be writing to at a ministerial level to ask for greater clarity, and then to understand the October 23 deadline? Because if that is a movable beast, we need to be making our decisions on that understanding. Thank you.
Given where we are at the moment, Adam, possibly a séance would be the most sensible way to take it forward.
Councillor, I think it's a really good question. I haven't reread all the letters and documents we've received from the Home Office today. My recollection, and I'm sure Andrew will shout if I've got this wrong, is that they've been very clear that it will be resolved by October 23 at the latest. So we have documents in writing already from the Minister saying, and that's one of the reasons they say we encourage you to consider not processing, because it is coming, if you see what I mean. But it's a difficult one, because that is a long way off for some people who are currently planning to retire. So it's trying to reach that happy medium in the interim.
David Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions. The first one is how many people took their pension at the full level in the past year since we last processed this?
So a number of people took them at the full level because, I knew I forget it at some point. It's like the mute button, isn't it, when you're doing the kind of thing. So there are a number of people who've been able to take their full pension because they weren't affected by the transition to the 2015 scheme. So there are a number of people who just taken their full pension anyway. The people who were impacted by that is that 18 number. So since the point where you decided to start processing immediate detriment, 18 people have been able to retire under the provisions that you put in place to move their lump sum and their annual back to the 92 scheme. And 13 of those have been able to go since the Home Office withdrew their guidance and their funding, which was, I think, in November last year. So, there is a point that we already have some liability for those individuals, which we discussed at the last meeting. However, the indication now is that we have more information on quite what that liability is going to look like. And that's the potential that has changed, as well as the kind of legal position. So, sorry, that felt like a long answer, but does that answer your question, David?
Yes, it does. And my second question is, if we, paragraph 5.9 talks about 10 people being potentially able to retire from October 2022, what if we were to extrapolate that out to 2023? How many people would be in that case, please? Do we know?
Sorry, how many people would be
eligible to retire
by 2023? I think the number, I don't have those stats with me, and I think the numbers were anyway. It was difficult because we didn't know at that point whether it was the 30 or the 25, and we still can't sort of be solid on it. But from the whole process of the April to October 23 was between, I think, 44 and 99. However, some people will have retired now from those, and so what I would need to do is update the figures for you, taking it up to October 23. But when we started this process, those were the numbers that we were looking at who would be potentially retiring. And the difference is whether it's the 30 or the 25. So that's kind of where the sort of, it was around 40 or 50 on as well.
Those are quite big numbers.
So just temporary pause, members, whilst the crew respond to that incident. So, Councillor, just to add to that, the reason why the figures are kind of quite a wide variance is because there are some variances in terms of accessing pension benefits. So 50 years of age is a key age trigger for that, and 25 years service. Of course, some colleagues also bring pensionable years with them as well. So generally the 25 years and the 30-year career length time historically has been the most reliable. But of course now we've got the different variances coming into play, hence why we have quite a wide ranging estimate in terms of numbers, or best case or worst case scenario, professional judgment based on that. Employees don't have to declare their intentions to us until such time as they wish to access their pension.
Neil Butters.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, what do we know about the position of neighbouring authorities? Are we somewhat in the van on this?
I might be able to help. So I did reach out to the Fire Lawyers Network to see what the position was at other fire authorities. I only got 5 responses. 3 of those have decided to pause all processing because of their concerns about the latest response from the tax office. 2 of which, so it's quite evenly balanced, have decided to continue to process category 1 cases, which is people coming up for retirement, but not touching those already retired, because it's felt that they've had their lump sum and their pension, and that will be resolved later on. So it's quite, so I only had 5 responses, but 3 are pause to continue in limited circumstances.
Could I also add to that? I also reached out to my Treasurer network, and out of 4 responses I received, 3 have deferred in line with the guidance from the government, and 1 is continuing with category 1 cases, of which they say are minimal cases.
Okay. Ben Nutland.
Thanks, Chair. Having listened to all the members' contributions so far, I'm slightly concerned that we seem to be hanging on this 2023 date when we know that government legislation, timetables can change, priorities can change as well. So I think we have to bear in mind that we have to, even with the letters from the Home Office that we've received, we have to take them with a pinch of salt. I think our main concern has to be protecting the fire authority and any, the financial sums that we're going to have to give out depending on how this moves forward. So I would be quite comfortable moving forward with the 4 cases that we definitely know about, and then I wouldn't want to put words into Simon's mouth, but then the process of pausing and then seeing where we are afterwards. I think that would probably be the best case going forward for us to not only protect the position of the authority, but also keep in line with any potential legislation or government updates that are coming down the line.
Okay. So does anybody else wish to speak? Andrew Varney.
Thank you, Chair. I was just, obviously employees must be fully aware of this predicament, and I'm just wondering how they feel about it. I mean, are they sort of magnanimous about it? Are they kind of annoyed, outraged? What's the sort of general mood?
I think talking to staff around the organisation, it's a very emotive topic, a very sensitive topic as well. As I said, it's not for will and desire to try and resolve the matter. It's just a lack of clarity that we're working within as an authority in terms of the associated financial risks with that. So it's both frustrating but quite emotive. And as I said earlier on, I'm very conscious of maintaining good industrial relations and trying to balance the risk of potential claims against the authority through not processing against the risk of the financial liability that the authority are faced with. So it really is a very difficult one to navigate through and to determine the course of action that's necessary.
Okay, so I think everybody has spoken who wanted to speak. Am I getting the impression from colleagues that going on the recommendations that we would clearly note A in our recommendations and on the choice to go for the pausing with the caveat that the 4 people who have indicated they wish to retire and clearly are making moves to do so, that we would include them within the current arrangements? Is that the mood of the meeting I'm picking up? Okay, so on that basis, do I find a proposer for that? I've got Ben and Steve. You happy to second that, Steve? Okay. So, and I think the other point, I think we're going now to a vote if people are happy. I mean, clearly we are being put in a very difficult position, and colleagues who've been on this for a while will have had this motion on this item every single meeting for seemingly forever. So I don't think it's a want of trying by the authority to resolve it, and the fact that it's on such shifting sands does seem to make it extremely difficult both for us, and I also probably appreciate more importantly for staff, because I mean the guidance just seems to be changed by the minute. The one other point I would make to colleagues, and I'm sure the clerk will support me on this, if we do happen to get some clarity before the next planned meeting for the authority, I'm speaking for Brenda now as the chair, but as vice chair, I'd be more than happy to have an extraordinary meeting just for the single item if we had the opportunity to resolve this. So I hope, colleagues, you'd agree to that if we do get the opportunity prior to the next meeting to get any clarity at all across any of these items. We will have an extraordinary meeting to discuss that and take that forward. So I've got a proposer and a seconder. I was going to ask for votes in favour. Okay. Do we see any votes against? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. Are you happy to move forward on that basis, Angie, in terms of where we are? Yeah. And I know we've got employee representatives, and I hope you can understand that we are doing our best in extremely difficult circumstances, and the liabilities for everybody in this seem to be incredibly murky, and it just makes it, what I wouldn't want to be doing, make a decision and actually end up members having to pay extra tax because they weren't aware of the situation. That's another great concern of mine, that and people aren't not getting pensions. So I guess it's not great, but it's it's the best of the worst, if I can understand, make that point. So we are aware of the concerns of FBU and colleagues more generally. So please, thank you for your forbearance on this. Thank you. Right. Item 12 then.
Yes, let's go back to item 12. So item 12 is on.
Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair. So item 12 is the 2022-26 Reserve Strategy.
You just take to page 41 because they're on different pages.
I'm instructed to give you a page reference, which is page 41. So this report provides members with an updated reserve strategy for 22-26. And for new members, this is based on the approved strategy from last year, 21-25, and it provides an update as at 31st of May 2022. In line with the Fire and Rescue National Framework, it's very important for fire authorities to provide for reserves to manage their financial position and to manage financial risk. And I'm asked as Treasurer, I have a duty to report to the Fire Authority on the robustness and adequacy of the financial reserves of the Fire Authority. So working closely with SLB, we've undertaken a review of the reserves, and we are aligning the utilisation of reserves with agreed priorities, including the capital strategy. And because we need to take into account value for money, we are trying to maximise our reserves to fund the approved 3-year capital strategy. So Appendix 1 is the updated Treasury Management Strategy, and I believe that's on page 45 for members. And the updated reserve summary can be found in Appendix 2, which I believe is on page 53. In terms of key risks, these are outlined in Section 6, which is on page 43. And in terms of mitigating those risks, we are integrating the review of reserves with financial planning strategies and the service plan. SLB and myself as Treasurer are reviewing the utilisation of those reserves, and I will report an update to members in the autumn as part of the financial reporting framework. The recommendations on page 41, section 2. The Fire Authority is asked to approve the 22-26 reserve strategy outlined within Appendix 1. And secondly, to agree for the approved 22-26 reserve strategy to be published on our website. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Danielle. So do I see a proposer for the recommendations? Councillor Wilcox? Well, once we've got the substantive motion, then we do the debate. Is that okay? So you're proposing at the moment? No? Do I see a proposer? Thank you, Richard Tucker. Do a seconder? Ruth Jacobs, thank you very much. Okay, so we've got a proposer and a seconder. Are there any questions? David.
Thank you, Chair. I know that the service is planning to spend 16.4 million on important projects from the capital programme strategy presented at the last Fire Authority meeting in March, like the replacement of Type B appliances, new and refurbished buildings, the digital transformation programme, information technology and operational control. This leaves a projected reserve balance of 3.3 million. What are the services planned to replenish the reserves, please?
Thank you for that question. If I give the first response from a financial viewpoint, so if we look at...
Sorry, hold on. Is it possible to turn that phone off, whoever's phone? Okay. Can you silence it next time now? Thank you. Thanks, Danielle. Sorry.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, that's a really good question. If members look at Appendix 2, what members will see is that right at the bottom of that financial summary, this is the work that SLB and myself reviewed in May. We went through every single reserve, legacy reserves, to understand if they were still required, if they were appropriate, if they related to approved priorities. And we were able to increase our earmarked capital reserve quite significantly from that review. So in the capital strategy that was approved, we felt that we would need as a fire authority to go out for further external funding in 23-24. That is now not the case, which is really positive news. And I feel at the moment that this review of reserves and the updated reserves will allow us not to look for additional funding until the end of the 3-year capital strategy. I think moving forward in terms of when those reserves are fully utilised, there is then a very valid question when we look at the next capital strategy in terms of prioritisation.
Okay. Steve Smith.
Thanks. Just on a point of detail that kind of relates back to the last item. In the reserve summary, we've got carrying a reserve at the moment to mitigate the impact of ID. And it says that by 2026, we're still expecting to be carrying that same reserve and not have spent it. Now, if this is all going to be wrapped up by October 23, why are we still carrying a reserve and not having used it by 2026?
That is also a very good question. Thank you. I think that this particular item was undertaken on an optimistic view on the basis that this paper was coming to the Fire Authority at the same time as the pension ID paper, and it was not intended to make any assumptions or decision in terms of what the Fire Authority would decide today on ID pension. I think now that we've had our decision on ID pension, Finance and myself will look at that outside of the meeting.
Okay, are you content? So we'll be voting on an amended reserve then, will we, Danielle? On that basis, you're changing that money out?
I think generally what we'd probably look to do if members are happy with this proposal would be it's going to take a little bit of time for Finance to work through the recent information received in terms of the model.
Okay.
So what I'd suggest, I think I would normally bring this back in the autumn to the Fire Authority with the standard financial reporting.
So we'll leave as is, and then we'll make that your report in detail on that in the autumn. Okay. For new members, SLB means Senior Leadership Board. Okay.
No, Service.
Oh, Service Leadership Board.
Service Leadership Board.
Chair, sorry, Councillor Smith, just to answer your question around the 2026, if you note on Appendix 2, you'll see that the PFI Equalisation Fund equates to 1.2 million of that 3.3 million. That contract isn't due to end until 2028, so that will remain in the reserve strategy for that purpose. And you can see the date of projected estimates of March 2026, which is prior to the end of the PFI agreement. Yeah. And of course, included in that, we've also got a working reserve, which is prudent to have so as well.
No, that's fine. I wasn't saying we should have spent everything. It's just that one line of ID reserve. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Apologies.
Right. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, we've had a recommendation and we've had it seconded. Sorry, proposal we've had it seconded. Are we in favour of supporting the recommendations? All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? No, unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. Item 13. Steve Imrie.
Thank you, Chair. Members, ordinarily you receive an update from the Service Liaison Officer over our HMIC action plan and its progress. Unfortunately, Pete's not here today, so I'll do my best to give you a brief overview. Members will recall that following the update on our HMI Round 2 assessment, published in December 21 and updated to the authority in March this year, members requested that the new Round 2 action plan be brought back to this meeting to enable all members to have visibility and awareness of the action plan that was published. As briefed at the March meeting by Pete, there are 22 new areas for improvement within the action plan, which equate to 60 individual actions thereafter that the service are addressing. As previously agreed by the authority and reconfirmed at the meeting of the authority in March, the approval of the publication of the initial draft Round 2 action plan and the subsequent scrutiny process is delegated to the PRSC, and as such, version 2.1 of the action plan is now live and was published following the PRSC on the 21st of April this year. That's contained at Appendix 1 of your papers, and obviously that was the request made in March meeting for that to return to this meeting. The only other thing I would say is members will be aware, and as outlined in the paper, both its sections 3.3 and footnote 1 on page 56 of your papers, the service has received high-profile recognition for its achievements in completing the round 1 actions from the then HMI Wendy Williams and the Chief Inspector of Fire and Rescue Services, Tom Windsor, which I believe is an endorsement and reassurance of existing arrangements that the authority has approved subsequently and which were undertaken for sign-off, approval and scrutiny of the new round 2 action plan. And that's the update, members.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the comprehensive report. Thanks, Pete Davis, for the comprehensive report. Are there any, I mean, the paper is for noting, are there any questions? Can you help me, Amanda? This is going to the PRSC meeting in mid-July, in any case, for more detailed discussion.
Yeah, so the only reason this has come here as a one-off is because when the report was published back in December, it was published on the date of our fire authority meeting, so it missed publication. So when you considered the report at your March meeting, the feeling was you'd rather quite like to see the action plan as well, so not just the recommendations, but what we're going to do about it. So the Fire Authority confirmed its delegation to PRSC to monitor it on a regular basis, but said, could we just see it back once so that we could have a look at the version 1 of the action plan? That was a request particularly from the Chair, Councillor Brenda Massey. That's why you've got it today. But after today, the same will happen as happened last time, is it will be subject to review and scrutiny at each PRSC meeting.
Right, fine. Do you have any questions or comments? Okay, well, I've got one. On page 71, there's quite a lot of conversations throughout the paper around software and the software system. And I guess one thing I would ask the PRSC committee to note and to look out for is how we deliver on that software, because clearly that for me that's quite a big risk element.
The other thing to bear in mind, one Councillor Wilcox has offered to be our IT champion. So I know he's working quite closely with the IT transformation team. I think that's right. So that might give you some comfort as well.
Okay.
I hope so.
But I can certainly make a note to draw that. So that is on page 71.
It's the POROS, is it POROS? Porous.
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 Okay.
So members, PORIS stands for Provision of Risk Information System, and it's effectively information we provide to operational firefighters on buildings of risk to them should we get an incident. So it's a whole data set, if you like, information around the building in terms of plans, local water supplies, layout, occupancy, type of process that takes place, any storage of any hazardous materials. And it's just a database that firefighters can access through the mobile data terminals so that if you do get an incident, they're pre-informed, if you like, of what the likely hazards and risks are from that building. And what we've been working on is what we've called an Avon data warehouse, which takes in a range of information from different data sets, which then sits behind the software interface that Councillor Davis referred to there, so that we can look from both prevention, protection and response. And it's just currently in the build of that at the moment.
Will it incorporate a dot matrix printer still or not?
We're trying to avoid that.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So this is for noting. Do I need a proposer and a seconder for noting? I don't think so. Oh, well, I've got one anyway. I've got Adam Monk and Neil Butters. So we all happy to note? Yes, we're happy to note. Thank you. We'll move on to item 14 then, which is the Treasury Management Strategy Update. And that's back to you, Danielle, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So this is paper 14 on page 103. And the Treasury Management Strategy for the period 2022-25 which is based on last year's approved strategy and updated. The strategy itself can be found in Appendix 1 on page 107. In terms of key issues, the majority of the Treasury management functions are undertaken by Bristol City Council through our financial services contract, and our finance team work closely with BCC. But it is important to note that it's the Fire Authority that has overall responsibility for this strategy. This strategy aligns very closely, as members can see, with both the capital strategy and the reserve strategy. And as noted in the earlier paper, SLB and myself have been working closely to develop this. And as members will appreciate, all of these papers have come in at the same time. So it's a question of, through the financial reporting that I do in year, I will provide members with the relevant update. In terms of the recommendation on page 103, it's to ask the Fire Authority for approval of this updated strategy. And just before I close my update, I would like to thank the finance team and Bristol City Council finance lead for their help in updating this strategy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have a recommendation in the papers. Do I see a proposer? Steve Smith, and a seconder, Adam Monk. Thank you, colleagues. So we'll throw this open to debate. I've got Steve Smith first.
Okay, thank you very much. Two questions, if I may. Point 25 on the strategy talks about deferring borrowing as late as possible, use the reserves first, unless it was felt there's a significant risk of a sharp rise in interest rates. Sort of feels like we might be there at the moment. Are we looking at that? Do we know where the tipping point is? When actually, if we're going to need to borrow, it's better to do it now and get a lower interest rate than to wait.
Thank you. So on that note, I think it's a really good question, because obviously this morning inflation rates were confirmed at 9.1%, which is, it's quite frightening, isn't it? I think there's a balance to be struck on this one. I think where we have internal resources which have no cost to the Fire Authority, i.e. reserves, that's our first priority in terms of reviewing those reserves, as SLB have done over the last month, and deciding what funds are available to support that 3-year capital strategy. So I think that's the issue that we discussed in the earlier reserve paper. I think then, in terms of the question that you've raised, I think that's something that we'd need to look at over the next 6 months and review it and come back to members. And first of all, I'd like to do that work with finance and also with SLB members.
Thank you. Can I have a
please.
Second one? It talks about the loans we currently have, 7 million worth, half of which is due in 2030. And it says the repayment of those loans will need to be funded through earmarked reserves. Do we have any reserves to repay that in 2030 at the moment?
Yes, we do, and I'm working with the head of finance to make sure that we have available resources to pay back those loans in full.
Okay, so I couldn't, when I looked at the reserve list, I couldn't see anything in there for loan repayment.
And some of this is the complexities of local accounting finance, which I'm happy to have a separate conversation with you on outside, in terms of cash resources as well as reserves.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We'll do that.
Thank you.
If this is outside, it'd be very, very hot, so you wouldn't want to be here long. Andrew Varney.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just Appendix 1, Section 34. It says one of the key principles of a robust treasury management strategy is to invest ethically, and AFA is working towards this principle. I'm just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. I mean, what sort of progress are we making? And when we talk about ethical investment, are we talking about just environmental sustainability? Are we also talking about political concerns, so, human rights, things like that?
Okay, thank you. So I will give an initial feedback from the Treasurer point of view on that one. This is something that SLB and I discussed last year, we felt it was really important as part of the Fire Authority portfolio strategies to look at this kind of ethical issue. And I think obviously the Fire Authority is absolutely signed up to that. What we then did in finance is, because we're working through Bristol City Council, is we checked that issue with our colleagues in BCC. And obviously in the main, they are working as much as they know. The issue that our BCC colleagues raised is that, yes, the answer is yes in the main. However, they couldn't give 100% reassurance because of sub-investments and sub-lenders. So I feel that we've taken that as far as we possibly can, working through our financial services contract. But if there were specific issues, concerns that members had, or members had specific questions, I'm happy for members to email me separately after today's meeting, and I'd be very happy to go back to BCC colleagues on that.
Okay, are there any more questions or comments? We have a proposer and seconder. I was going to go to the vote then. Are we happy to approve the Treasury Management Strategy? All those in favour? I don't see any votes against or any abstentions. If I've missed you, please raise your hand. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Danielle. So we now move on to item 15, which is the Fire Authority meeting dates and forward plan. And that's you, Amanda, yeah?
Thank you. Yes, members, again, this is a paper you expect to see at every AGM. It sets out the proposed schedule of meetings for the forthcoming municipal year, so that's this June until next May 2023, and also revised forward plan. For the new members, for the benefit of the new members, the forward plan tries to identify the papers of importance you'll be considering at the next iteration of meetings. So it's not every meeting for the whole municipal year, it's just the next meetings in the diary for each of the committees. So the proposed dates for meetings are set out at paragraph 5.1. They sometimes do have to be varied for various reasons, so that's why we've refreshed the dates today so that everybody can put them in their diaries. We try to make sure that we have meetings at the headquarters and also at our training facility at Seven Park. But as you will notice from today, we're trying to move around the unitary authority area. So if you ever have a suggestion from a meeting venue, sometimes they're prohibitively expensive, unfortunately. But if you do have an idea for a venue, please let us know. So that is the table in the paper at page 124, so I ask you to note those dates in your diary. The forward plan is at Appendix 1. I won't go through it, but it does set out for the Fire Authority and each of the committees the major papers that you will be considering. I'm happy to take any questions.
And just for clarity, we normally have a 2 p.m. start for the Fire Authority meetings and a 10:30 start for the committee meetings, is that right?
If the venue availability permits, yes, that's what we try to do.
Okay. Right, so we're asked to approve and note. So before we go for debate, shall I ask for a proposer, please? Adam Monk, Robert Payne to second, thank you. So is there any debate? Okay, so we'll go straight for a vote. All those in favour? I don't see anybody voting against or any abstentions, but if you are, please show. Thank you, colleagues. Item 16, the annual review of service charges, and that's down to Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a paper which we present to the Fire Authority each year, and it's based on charges which we, as a fire service, are able to make to persons in line with... Couldn't have timed that better, could I? Oh, we'll go again. We'll wait. You sure?
Well, it hasn't gone.
Try again.
It's not our ice cream, so.
In line with legislation which is set out. So we present this paper annually. There are only a certain number of circumstances where we're able to charge, and it is at the discretion of our Chief Fire Officer as to whether or not we do that. but obviously these charges need to be approved by the fire authority. So what I'm presenting today is an updated charging structure. So they have stayed the same for the last couple of years, but because we've included a 3% inflation on our non-pay costs in the medium-term financial plan, we've also then increased these charges to reflect that, because obviously at the moment we know that additional expenditure is a risk for us. So these charges are last year's charges plus that 3% inflation. So I'm asking you to approve this charging structure as set out with effect from the 1st of April, and that charges be levied in full in all cases, but power be delegated to the Chief Fire Officer or Chief Exec to remit the whole or part of the charge if, in all the circumstances, he considers it appropriate to do so. I'm happy to take any questions.
Can I just point out, so the appendix has absolutely the right date on it, Appendix 2, but the year, for some reason there's a typo in the recommendation, should be approve the charging rate structure as set out in Appendices 1 and 2 from effect from 1st of April 22. So you're agreeing to this retrospectively. Ideally, this paper should have come to you before the 1st of April. So it's a retrospective approval of those rates from the 1st of April this year.
Okay, so with that amendment, do I see a proposer? There might be a question. Richard, are you happy to propose?
I just had a question, but I'm happy to propose too, if that saves you time.
Do I see a seconder? Yassin Mohammed, thank you. So we're now open for debate. Questions? Richard.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering how we compare with neighbouring and other authorities in terms of our charging structure. I don't know how much sort of comparison you've got at all, but just be handy to know where there are any sort of variations, and not that it has to impact on our decisions at all, but it's just to sort of get a benchmark on.
So I've looked at a number of other fire services, and they are roughly similar, and it will depend obviously on certain areas will have higher costs, but it is based around our kind of cost structures for the items that we can charge for. And again, it's not somewhere we see a lot of movement, but I think a lot of authorities and services as well are kind of looking at that now to see if it's worth increasing those charges. So.
Thank you, Claire. I was just going to ask the Chief Fire Officer just to explain his own rationale in terms of the charging process.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Charge is really on a cost recovery basis for us, and generally, as Claire presented then, is down to operational discretion. So from an instant perspective in sort of the categories, if it's a vulnerability aspect, then we may have a little bit of discretion from that perspective. If it's a non-emergency request for our resources, where a commercial premise, as an example, a commercial a business may be able to access other services to provide whatever else, such as pumping out of a flooding basement, as an example, where there's no life risk, no property risk, etc., then we give them the choice. But if they want our resource to do so, then that's potentially where a charge may be taking effect. But they're always notified prior to that.
Okay, thank you. So in other words, we're not actually competing with the commercial market, then, are we? Really, what you're saying? Okay, good. Any other questions? Dave Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in how you charge for an appliance coming out, because you talk about the charges are inclusive of personnel, petrol, oil, and mileage, and normal equipment. So the energy costs of diesel and petrol are quite high and rapidly changing. So does this actually reflect the true cost of appliance visiting you?
So that's where Claire's put in a little bit of additional this year because of additional costs from there. But they're generally set for the year. So whatever sort of fuel fluctuations throughout that year is just part of that standard charge, really, and not something that we would potentially take into account.
Because I know that Bristol City Council recently bulk purchased diesel in advance because it was a major contract. So I just wondered if you were doing a similar sort of thing.
So we do have fuel stocks at strategic locations around our service, generally used for business continuity, so contingencies from that perspective. And we have fuel bowsers, so where we can take them to an operation instant and refuel appliances. But we do have a commercial contract with a fuel card system as well, where we're able to access fuel from different petrol stations. But in essence, we try not to hold too much bulk stock. We hold some, but that's purely for business continuity reasons.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there any other debate? Any other questions? No. Oh, Neil Butters.
Thank you. Sorry if I've missed it, but what about call-outs for false alarms, particularly auto dials? That's a big area, isn't it?
It is, yes. So we do a call challenge where there's no life risk. We, Fire Control, who take the call, will do a call challenge to assess actually whether or not we are needed. If it's repeat calls, then generally another alternative intervention, such as referral to a fire protection officer who may visit the premise from there and provide some advice around the maintenance of the system. But generally that is done at the call challenge process, and where there's life at risk, we will generally respond from there.
Thank you. So we've got a proposal and a seconder for the recommendation on page 129. Unless there's any other debate, I was going to go for a vote. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? I see no hands. So thank you, unanimous again. Thank you, colleagues. Now we move on to item 17, back to Danielle, which is the revenue financial report on page
135.
135, thank you.
Can I just give I did advise in advance, so I'd have to leave before the end. Unfortunately, this is the point. So.
Okay.
Apologies, but thank you.
Well, thank you. Good to see you. Have a safe journey.
So this report number 17, page 135, provides an update to members on the final year-end position for the last financial year 21-22. And it's pleasing to note that Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 reflect a balanced position for the year, which I'm sure members will be pleased with. I'd like to thank the finance team for their hard work on this. It always looks quite easy in spreadsheets, but there's a considerable amount of work that goes behind this. And the finance team and myself are currently working with our external auditors to produce the draft statutory accounts. And in the report I note that these draft statutory accounts will be reviewed at our next AJAC meeting, which is due to be held on the 29th of June. External audit then start their audit on the 4th of July, and that's a very, very detailed process to provide assurance to Fire Authority members. And we will then take back final audited statutory accounts to AJAC in November. The recommendation on this paper on page 135, item 2, is the Fire Authority is asked to note the final income and expenditure position for the revenue budget for the last financial year.
Okay, so we've asked to note this, so are there any questions before we note? I'm quite happy to note then, aren't we? So I don't need to get a proposal in a second, is that what you said?
I don't think so.
Okay, so are we all happy to note? Thank you. Oh, Richard, did you want to say? Oh, okay. Thank you. So we're happy to note, and I think on behalf of all colleagues here, I'd like to pass on my thanks to the team in terms of finance. I know it's been a very difficult journey over the last few years, shall I say, in terms of personnel and changing systems, and thank you very much for all you've done.
Thank you.
Okay, so we now move... Oh, I've been caught out now. The Capital Programme report.
Thank you. I'm happy to kickstart the intro on that one and to give a financial update, and then for operational issues, happy for my operational colleagues to pick up key issues from their point of view. So this report is also a year-end report on capital. So again, it looks at the last financial year ending 31st of March 2022. The details of the capital programme are shown within Appendix 1, which is, I was just looking for the page reference, page 163. And just for new members particularly, that appendix shows the approved capital budget as the first column, the forecast position that was reported to PRSC, because in addition to reporting capital to Fire Authority, members are aware that this is also reported to PRSC. The actual expenditure for the year, which is the 3.994 million, and then members can see the variance, which is the year-end variance, which is 4.7 million. So just for that sort of clarification. Obviously, again, director lead, this refers back to the director lead from last year, and obviously there have been personnel changes that members are aware of. On that basis, I'm happy to pass over to operational colleagues if there are any comments. So if I can pass over to Vaughan first.
Thanks, Danielle. Members, it's just to bring some clarity to the reasons for the quite significant underspend in the capital programme from the fleet aspect. As you know, we have an appliance replacement programme. Currently, our appliances, we have an average age of 7.1-year-old appliances across the service, hence the need to replenish our appliances type B water ladders periodically. We currently have plans for 4 type B appliances in the 22-23 financial year, totaling 1.5 million, and then a further 6 appliances toward the end of 22-23, which would then total 2.2 million on top of that. Special appliances are breathing apparatus support vehicles and ERU, or Environmental Response Unit. There's been impacts on delays for all of those appliances due to inability of our suppliers to provide the vehicle and the chassis for those appliances. Plus then once we receive the vehicle and chassis, it would then go to a body shop to be built upon to our requirements for the type of appliance we would want to sit on top, like the type B appliance you saw today with the Pride wrapping. So there's been unavoidable delays there. We also have a commitment of almost 410,000 for our ancillary replacement programme. So that would be the liveried vehicles, cars, vans that you see around the service, used both for transporting all our ancillary equipment to our various service areas. As you'll be aware, there's been a global shortage of semiconductors, which has impacted that delivery. We have received around half a dozen large transit-type van-size vehicles, which are currently in our workshops to replace those which are coming to the end of their workable life. And then we do have a significant number of cars and vans on order to replace our station stock and our officer stock and reserve stock of vehicles. But unfortunately, as I say, having spoken to Brian, our fleet manager, there have been some significant delays, and unfortunately, we're not the only service experienced in these delays. This is a delay across all fleet purposes, across all organisations, and Brian himself is currently at the Interschultz show in Austria looking at alternative vehicles that could potentially be purchased to speed this up, but as things currently stand, that's basically why there is such a large underspend, and unfortunately is something that's out of our hands and nothing that we can improve the flow rate of those vehicles. Is just awaiting those parts, replacement parts, and obviously the issues have been experienced by many people other than ourselves.
Okay, members, I'll give a brief summary update in relation to the premises capital programme. It's very well summarised on Appendix 3 anyway. However, members will note, and as previously discussed, for those members that could make it to the Member Strategic Engagement Forum, a lot of the reasoning behind these underspends have been sort of communicated previously by Simon Richards, our premises manager. For reassurance, though, the underspends that are noted within Appendix 3 and the financial summary, all are anticipated to be back on track within this next financial year. So in relation to Avon, as is noted, Phase 2, is due to commence, or is underway, sorry, and is due to complete within this financial year. In relation to Weston and Bath, they're both projects have been in the design phase. However, in relation to Weston, a lot of the work by our premises department in the land searches and inquiries of land around Weston for potential sites, that's been completed, and we're expecting analysis of that work to come back to SLB before bringing a paper back to Forest Authority in the future to update members on that aspect. The Bath project, as members again are aware, that is our ambition there has been with a multi-service venue potential at the Bath site, still in the design phase, and discussions obviously remain ongoing in that regard. However, again, that will be, is expected or anticipated that those design phase underspends will be accommodated as that moves forward in this coming year. And they are predominantly the main underspends that are summarised in relation to the Appendix 3, Chair.
Okay, are there any other comments from officers? Okay, so we're being asked to note this, so I don't need to ask for proposal and second. So are there any questions? First of all, Neil.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. One is the last strategic meeting we went to, there was a rather indifferent report regarding the involvement of SWAS with the Bath project. They seem to be more interested in doing something in Wiltshire than they were progressing that, which I hope can be resolved in the not too distant future, because it's holding us all back really. The other question was, I was wondering whether Bath North East Somerset Council ought to be mentioned in view of the potential movement of the emergency planning capability over there.
Thank you, Councillor. In relation to SWAST, we've been in conversation with SWAST for a while now, and also colleagues with police and other partners with regards to the possibility of a joint service. Unfortunately, with SWAST, the timing-wise, in terms of their building replacement, their estates replacement programme doesn't necessarily match ours, and of course they have a huge estate to manage overall. So it's unfortunate that we haven't been able to align the timings with regards to any joint premise at Bath itself. In relation to conversations with Baines local authority, yes, the estates team are constantly in touch with seeking opportunities for collaboration, space requirements, etc. As to whether or not that would be a rented space or whether or not it would be part of the joint procurement process in terms of design, are still discussions that are ongoing.
But you don't think it should be mentioned here?
Unsure why it hasn't been referenced. It's been mainly around the big capital investment partners that we're talking with, and at the moment Baines has not yet identified that they want to make a significant capital investment in the project. More a partner in terms of occupying space is where the discussion is more likely to be going at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? I've got one. Dave Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question for Vaughan about the transformation project, because it appears not to be spending any money, but I know that it is.
It's very transformative, I imagine.
Having not been there for the last 3 months, it's obviously slowed down since I left. Yeah, the issue there, Councillor, is that that's the amount of money that was set aside at the February 21 Fire Authority meeting for the programme, and that budget is in there, but that's for the 21 to 24 period, so it covers the 3 years, not just the 1 year, so that money is split up over those 3 years more or less equally, but as you're aware, there is a significant spend which is about to be made in relation to the Firewatch programme and the
Adam Monk.
So I know the answer to this question, but I suppose it's important to have it formally recorded. We've been reassured by the fleet manager, whose name I currently can't recall, that although there is delay in the vehicles, the price is set in stone, so we should not see any variation in cost. Is that correct?
I'd say no.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, having had those conversations with Brian, the vehicles are on order at a set price, and that price is set for when those vehicles will arrive, whenever that may be. Hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later, but as explained, there are a number of unavoidable delays to that.
Yeah, just on that, Councillor, if you recall, we bought a paper a good 18 months ago, I think, to authority with agreement to really purchase 10 with a call-off contract up to 10, and that will enable us to fix a price for that number of appliances, which that is part of that procurement process at the moment.
Brian Hodkinson.
Yeah. Because we're slightly behind schedule on this, has there been any sort of breakdowns or anything, expenditure which we've had to make because of, because the machines were planned to be replaced? I mean, what's been happening in between? Were we fortuitous and, it was basically new problems, or?
Sorry, Kath, I'm not quite sure of your question, what the question was.
If the machines were planned to be purchased by a certain date and actually arrived, obviously they were to replace other machines which we were currently using. And obviously they were planned to be replaced because obviously there's breakdowns and things which may happen. I'm just wondering, was there a lot of breakdowns in between, or because of the good maintenance, were we lucky?
No, we have a very good maintenance schedule and servicing schedule on the vehicles themselves. As Vaughan referenced there, we have an average fleet life of 7.1 years. And that's a possibility that we can just slightly extend that with the delays. It's likely to extend that by the time of delivery to about 7.5 years, and we think that's, on average, we think that's reasonably manageable in terms of reliability. We also have a reserve fleet as well, which helps, so we can change and circulate the vehicles around to try and manage any impact. But at this moment in time, we've been able to manage that internally.
Okay, so I'm going to ask two questions then related to that. First of all, around the cost. So we've got a call-off contract with the suppliers of chassis and bodywork, yeah?
Only for the initial order, I think it was 10 vehicles, yeah, was the contract went out to procurement for.
So if those suppliers can't supply and we have to go elsewhere, there could be a cost impact. So I guess the question we may need to answer is how reliable are they going to be actually ever delivering them? Because it might be a set price, but there aren't physically any chassis coming. We've got to go elsewhere. There's a cost implication. So I guess in due course we need to understand the risk element around that. And following up from Brian's question, I suppose, bearing in mind the semiconductor issue has been around for a very long time now and seems not to be getting any better in terms of vehicles more generally. I suppose we, as the fire authority, need to understand, when does the disaster point start to arise? It may well be it's not for 2-3 years in which we do start to run out of serviceable equipment. Because I think that I'm not denying anything you've said in terms of that, but there will be a time in the relatively near future in which it will become less able to survive as a fleet and deliver, because the vehicles are so old and outdated for whatever reason.
Yeah, that is a concern in terms of supply and demand, so suppliers, and particularly around the delays which we're experiencing, and obviously not the only organisation experiencing that. We have been reassured by the fleet manager and by the industry that that's a short-term restriction on availability of supplies. In relation to the availability of appliance and manufacturers, currently we've gone for the chosen chassis as a Volvo-based chassis. They haven't indicated that they are likely to pause any manufacturing of the chassis, but they're pretty much a standard chassis anyway, and it is really the bodywork where a company called Emergency One have currently got our contract at the moment, or a well-established provider of the coach build, which goes on top of the chassis from that perspective, and a lot of services are using Emergency One. And again, we have not received any indication that there's a risk there, but of course we always need to be alive to that with market engagement. At this moment in time, we are managing that as best professional judgment that we have with the information we have at this moment. The placing of the orders, Emergency One, as I said, are a very popular coach builder for the emergency sector and are a well-established manufacturing company with many orders on their books at this moment in time, which is a little bit of an assurance, but of course there's never any guarantees, but we try to monitor as much as we can. Okay, so I'll not labour the point overly, but I wonder whether a report in due course, and I mean autumn, winter time, should come to the relevant committee. That would be PRSC, I was thinking possibly. If the chair of PRSC perhaps could receive a report for a meeting to address the implications in terms of not only the cost but the physical delivery of equipment, because I do think we need to be cognizant of that. And if it's all absolutely fine, we're completely mashing, that's absolutely great, but if there is a level of risk, I think we need to make sure as a fire authority we're aware of that and decide things accordingly. Absolutely, that would be always good practice for us to review that, and I'm sure the fleet manager and our procurement team can work on providing a report for PRSC. Okay, lovely, thank you. So this report is for noting. I've not seen any other requests to speak, so are we all happy to note? Okay, we're all getting lots of nodding notes, so thank you very much. Thank you all, and we do appreciate the extremely difficult circumstances you're working in terms of capital delivery at the moment. So thank you for that, and thanks to the teams that are working with you. Service roundup, Steve Imrie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's final paper of the open session, I think. So members will be aware that this is a standing agenda item paper with a view to giving members a brief update on some of the good work undertaken by all areas of the service between the dates of March and May this year. The paper is for information and for noting. Members will also be aware there's an opportunity to ask questions ahead of this meeting should they require further clarity on any of the points within this particular paper. None were received. However, I'd just like to draw members' attention to a couple of items within the paper. Sections 5.6 on page 170 and section 5.15, because they're on page 171 because they're interlinked slightly. Going back earlier in the year, members will also recall that the authority donated approximately £50,000 worth of fire service equipment to the Ukrainian appeal via fire aid. As an extension of that, and as outlined in those two sections I've just quoted, the service, or members of the service, have also undertaken a couple of different events. One being a fundraising event in April, where staff from across the service undertook a 48-hour challenge to run and cycle the distance between the UK and the Ukraine, 1,823 kilometres in 48 hours. Staff more than exceeded that by over 1,000 kilometres in that time frame. Yes.
To Russia, did they?
Almost back. But they raised in that process £7,000 or just over £7,000 for the Ukraine Red Cross appeal. So wanted to bring that one to members' attention. In addition to that, and like I said, linked slightly, on the 20th of May, our vulnerable adults team from the risk reduction part of the service, in partnership with South Gloss and Southern Brooks, we hosted a welcome event at Yate Fire Station for refugees from the Ukraine. It was a great success, both from the partnership arrangement, giving information to vulnerable people within our community over services they could access locally. It was supported by a number of businesses locally also with goodie bags and the like. So I just wanted to raise those, or bring those 2 points of this paper to members' attention. So it's a bit more than just the red truck side of life. There's a lot more activity goes on voluntarily within the service and its staff to support people vulnerable within the community. Like I say, the report is for noting, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. So yes, I mean, when you read through this part of the papers, it's, it just shows the breadth of what the Fire and Rescue Service does. It isn't, as you say, it isn't merely, well, I say merely, it isn't the attending instances. It's looking after people more generally and in many ways making life safe for them, so we don't have to go out to incidents because the incidents are prevented. So, and I think it's really useful for members and the wider public who read the papers to understand the breadth of what we do and the voluntary stuff we do. And I really thank all the members of Avon Fire and Rescue Service for everything they do for their communities, and I'm sure colleagues will echo those thoughts, so thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Are there any further questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up, so this is for noting, so are we noting? There's lots of nodding and noting, so thank you very much, colleagues. Item 21 is the next meeting on the next ordinary meeting. Bear in mind the comment I made around the potential for an extraordinary meeting if we get anything on the pensions situation. It's on Wednesday the 5th of October at 2 p.m. Hicksgate Fire Station TBC.
The reason it's TBC is we have a brand new fire station at Avonmouth, and there may be a chance that we can host the meeting there instead.
Okay.
So that's why it's sort of up in the air. Thank you.
And just to warn members, it may not be quite so warm on the 5th of October. Then again, it could be. So thank you for that. Now, item 22 is, I have to read out, to resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following items of business on the grounds that they contain exempt information pursuant to Schedule 12A, Part 1 of the Local Government Act 1972, and that in accordance with Schedule 12A, Part 2, Paragraph 10 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Now, I'm proud to propose that. Do I see a seconder? Ben Nutland, thank you. Do I have any votes then in favour? Any votes against? Any abstentions? Thank you, colleagues. These are now exempt items, so I'll ask the recording be stopped.